My mother is so obsessed with controlling me that she bought the house next door to watch me 24 hours, installed cameras in the yard, and invaded my house, leaving a note confessing the crime. The moving truck parked at the entrance of the neighboring house on a sunny Tuesday morning, and when I recognized the old jacaranda dining room furniture being unloaded by uniformed movers, I felt my stomach contract in a nauseating mixture of disbelief and absolute terror that made me drop the coffee cup I was holding, spreading the dark liquid across the white ceramic floor of my kitchen. It was impossible, completely impossible, that those were my mother's furniture being transported into the house that had been for sale for months. The house whose sold sign I had noticed 3 weeks earlier without giving it importance. The house that shared a 2.5 meter high lateral wall with my backyard, allowing anyone on the second floor to have complete and unobstructed view of my entire outdoor area, including the pool where I swam every morning, the garden where I cultivated my rare orchids, and especially the large windows of my living room that I kept open during the day to enjoy natural light. My 42 years of relatively independent life, meticulously built through carefully established boundaries and strategically maintained geographical distance, seemed to be crumbling before my eyes as I stood paralyzed by the kitchen window watching the endless parade of boxes labeled with Helena's unmistakable handwriting. My mother, who had solemnly sworn to respect my personal space after our last explosive argument about privacy exactly 8 months ago. The definitive confirmation came when I saw Helena elegantly descending from her imported silver sedan, wearing her impeccable beige linen outfit that she always reserved for important occasions, her gray hair perfectly styled in a low bun she had maintained since I was a child, and especially that satisfied and determined smile that I knew very well. The same smile she displayed when she had successfully executed some elaborate plan that no one had anticipated or managed to prevent. She looked directly at my window, knowing exactly where I would be at that time because she knew my morning routine with military precision after decades of observing me, studying me, cataloging every habit, preference, and behavioral pattern I developed, and waved cheerfully as if moving next door to her adult daughter who had begged for personal space was the most natural and reasonable thing in the world. The wave wasn't a casual greeting. It was a declaration of psychological warfare, a clear announcement that she had found a legal and social loophole to circumvent all the boundaries I had tried to establish, a demonstration of power that clearly said that no matter how many difficult conversations we had about autonomy and privacy, she would always find a way to maintain her obsessive surveillance over my life. Ricardo, my husband of 15 years, came running from the garage still wearing his navy blue robe, attracted by the sound of the cup shattering on the floor, and especially by my stifled cry of despair that had echoed through the silent house. His dark eyes quickly scanned the scene, the porcelain shards scattered across the floor, the coffee forming irregular puddles between the fragments, my face, which he would later describe as a mask of pure horror, and finally following my fixed gaze to the window where the spectacle of the move continued unfolding with professional efficiency. "Laura, what happened? Are you okay? Did you hurt yourself with the shards?" he asked initially, still not understanding the magnitude of the catastrophe that was materializing on the other side of the wall. When he finally processed what he was seeing, the familiar furniture being positioned in the neighboring house's garden, Helena supervising the movers with precise gestures, the endless boxes being stacked on the porch, his face went through a sequence of expressions ranging from initial confusion to gradual understanding, culminating in a mixture of disbelief and deep compassion, when he murmured the words that confirmed my worst nightmare. "My God, Laura, it's your mother. She bought the house next door." The story of my troubled relationship with Helena dated back to my earliest years of consciousness, when I began to realize that other children my age had mothers who didn't check their school bags 3 times a day looking for evidence of inappropriate behavior, who didn't install hidden recorders in bedrooms to monitor private conversations, who didn't interrogate teachers, friends, and acquaintances about every detail of their children's activities outside the home. Helena always justified her invasive behavior as dedicated maternal love and natural concern for the well-being of an only daughter. But even as a child, I sensed there was something deeply disturbing about the obsessive intensity with which she monitored every aspect of my existence. During my adolescence, her surveillance tactics progressively became more sophisticated. She learned to hack my email accounts when the internet became popular, installed tracking applications on my first cell phone without my knowledge, and went as far as hiring a private investigator to follow me during my first year of college, because I had dared to study in another city, 200 kilometers away from the house where she could observe me directly. My marriage to Ricardo had been a crucial turning point in the dynamics of our relationship. because for the first time in my life, I had an ally who understood the toxic nature of Helena's behavior and actively supported me in establishing healthy boundaries. Ricardo had personally witnessed numerous episodes of privacy invasion during our dating. Helena, coincidentally, showing up at restaurants where we had reservations, repeatedly calling during our dates with fabricated emergencies, and on a particularly disturbing occasion, trying to bribe the doorman of his building to access security camera footage from the hallway. It was Ricardo who encouraged me to seek therapy specializing in dysfunctional family relationships, who helped me understand that Helena's behavior was neither normal nor acceptable, and especially who stood by my side when I finally confronted my mother about the urgent need to establish clear and inviolable boundaries between our lives. The conversation had been explosive, dramatic, filled with mutual accusations and manipulative tears on her part, but I had left that confrontation naively believing that I had finally managed to make Helena understand that her behavior was destroying any possibility of maintaining a healthy relationship. Laura, breathe deeply. Let's think rationally about this. Ricardo tried to calm me, gently guiding me away from the window and the porcelain shards, his firm hands on my trembling shoulders. Maybe she hasn't bought the house. Maybe she's just helping someone with moving in. Maybe it's a coincidence. But even as he pronounced these hopeful words, I could see in his eyes that he also knew that coincidences didn't exist in Helena's meticulously planned universe. Each of her actions was calculated with surgical precision, every movement strategically elaborated to achieve her obsessive objectives of control and surveillance. The choice of that specific house, with its privileged view of our backyard, the physical proximity that would make it impossible to avoid daily casual encounters, the perfect timing right after I had mentioned during our last forced lunch that I was finally feeling free and happy with the distance we had established. All of this screamed premeditation, meticulous planning, and a relentless determination to regain control over my life that she believed to be her inalienable maternal right. The sound of the doorbell cut through our conversation like a sharp blade, and even before opening the door, I knew who would be on the other side. Helena was standing on my porch, impeccably dressed as always, holding a tray of homemade brownies that I immediately recognized as her special Belgian chocolate recipe that she always prepared when she wanted to emotionally manipulate me through culinary nostalgia. "Surprise, darling!" she exclaimed with theatrical enthusiasm that couldn't completely mask the triumphant gleam in her brown eyes. "I came to tell you the wonderful news in person. I'm your new neighbor. Now we can see each other every day, share meals, take care of each other. Exactly as I always dreamed it would be when you grew up and had your own family." The way she pronounced "your own family" carried a subtle venom, an implicit suggestion that my family wasn't truly mine, but an extension of hers, over which she maintained rights of perpetual supervision and interference. "Mom, what did you do?" I managed to ask, my voice coming out in a tone that oscillated between disbelief and despair. "We talked about this. You promised to respect my space. You swore you understood when I explained that I needed privacy to maintain my mental health." But Helena had already crossed the threshold, entering my house with the confidence of an owner, her eyes already scanning every detail of the environment, cataloging changes since her last visit, looking for evidence of decisions made without her consultation, of life lived outside her field of direct observation. Privacy, privacy, always this unhealthy obsession with privacy, she said with disdain, placing the tray of brownies on the coffee table as if she were planting a flag in conquered territory. "Family doesn't need privacy from each other, Laura. Only people with dark secrets and things to hide insist on this artificial separation. I am your mother. I have the sacred right to know everything about your life, to participate in every important moment, to protect you from your own misguided decisions." Ricardo positioned himself protectively by my side, his solid presence giving me strength not to yield to the emotional tsunami that Helena always managed to provoke with her manipulative rhetoric. "Helena, with all due respect, this is completely inappropriate," he said with the professional firmness he used in difficult corporate meetings. "Laura is a 42-year-old adult woman. She has the right to privacy and autonomy. Moving to the house next door without even consulting her is a serious violation of boundaries that you had agreed upon." Helena's face contorted into an expression of fabricated hurt that she had perfected over decades, a mask of maternal suffering that always preceded her cruelest emotional manipulations. "Ricardo, dear, I know you love my daughter and want to protect her, but you don't understand the depth of the bond between mother and daughter. You didn't carry Laura in your womb for 9 months, didn't spend sleepless nights when she was sick, didn't sacrifice your best years to ensure she had everything she needed. A husband is temporary, replaceable, but a mother is forever. The casual cruelty with which she dismissed my 15-year marriage, reducing Ricardo to a disposable accessory in my life, filled me with a rage that burned like acid in my veins. It was Helena's power to transform any confrontation about her inappropriate behavior into a competition about who loved me more, who had more rights over my life, who deserved greater access to my intimacy. "Mom, you need to leave my house now," I said, with a calmness that surprised me, considering the emotional hurricane devastating my interior. "I'm going to consult a lawyer about the legal options available to deal with this situation. What you did, buying the house next door without informing me with the clear intention of monitoring me, may constitute harassment or stalking, and I'm willing to seek judicial measures if necessary." The threat of legal action seemed to genuinely surprise Helena, her face momentarily losing the mask of unshakable confidence. "You would threaten your own mother with the police? Would you sue the woman who gave you life?" she asked with a trembling voice that could convince any external observer that she was the victim in this situation. "If necessary to protect my mental health and my basic right to privacy, yes," I replied, maintaining direct eye contact despite the knot forming in my throat. "You've crossed all reasonable boundaries, Mom. This isn't love. It's obsession. It's unhealthy control. It's a fundamental violation of my right to exist as an independent person." Helena stood up abruptly, her face now red with genuine or performative indignation. With her, it was always impossible to distinguish real emotions from calculated manipulations. "You'll regret this, Laura. One day, when I'm no longer here, you'll wish you had taken advantage of the opportunity to have your mother nearby, to share these precious years we have left. But then it will be too late, and you'll carry that guilt for the rest of your life." It was her classic final move: emotional blackmail involving mortality, projecting future guilt to control present behavior, transforming her invasion of privacy into misunderstood maternal sacrifice. After Helena left, slamming the door with dramatic force calculated to echo throughout the house, Ricardo and I remained embraced in silence for long minutes, processing the magnitude of what had happened and its implications for our future. Our home, our refuge, our sanctuary of privacy and peace, had been effectively transformed into an extension of Helena's surveillance domain. Every movement in the garden would be observed, every car in the garage cataloged, every visit questioned, every routine analyzed and criticized. The freedom I had fought so hard to achieve, the boundaries I had established with such emotional effort, had been obliterated by a simple real estate transaction that Helena had executed with the precision of a general planning and invasion. "We'll find a solution," Ricardo murmured against my hair, his arms tightening protectively around me. "We can build higher walls, install privacy fences, plant trees that block the view, or if necessary, we can consider moving." The idea of fleeing our own home because of Helena's invasion filled me with a mixture of sadness and revolt. It would be admitting defeat, allowing her to dictate where and how I could live my adult life. In the following hours, as I watched from the second-floor office window Helena directing the movers with military efficiency, strategically positioning furniture to maximize her observation capacity, installing what appeared to be an amateur telescope on the second-floor veranda that coincidentally pointed directly at our windows, I began to understand the true extent of her planning. This had not been an impulsive or opportunistic decision. Helena had clearly studied the house, calculated viewing angles, planned strategic positions for maximum observation. When I saw two uniformed installers mounting what were obviously high-definition security cameras pointed not at the street or her own yard, but directly at our garden, I knew we were dealing with something much more serious than simple maternal overprotection. Helena had created a sophisticated surveillance post, a command center from which she could monitor every aspect of our domestic life with technological precision that would render her old amateur espionage tactics obsolete. The phone rang, interrupting my spiral of increasingly dark thoughts. It was Donna Carmem, our elderly neighbor from across the street who had lived in the neighborhood for more than 40 years and knew all the families in the vicinity. "Laura, dear, I saw the movement in the house next to yours and became concerned," she said with her soft voice but laden with genuine worry. "The lady who is moving in. She approached me a few weeks ago asking very specific questions about you. She wanted to know your schedules, your routines, who visited you frequently if you traveled much. I found it strange at the time, but when she mentioned being your mother, I thought it was just normal family concern. Now, seeing the amount of observation equipment they're installing, I'm beginning to think there's something more serious happening." The confirmation that Helena had conducted detailed reconnaissance of the area, interrogating neighbors and collecting intelligence about our lives before executing her strategic move, transformed my anxiety into an iron determination not to allow her to destroy the life I had built with such effort. The first week after Helena's move was a torturous exercise in undeclared mutual surveillance, where each of our movements was observed and cataloged by her omnipresent presence in the house next door, transforming simple, everyday activities into conscious performances under the scrutinizing gaze of an unwanted audience that never slept. Waking up in the morning had become a ritual of anxiety, because I knew that the moment I opened the bedroom curtains, Helena would be strategically positioned at some point on her property, pretending to water plants that didn't need water or clean already immaculate windows, but actually mentally documenting the exact time we started our day. Ricardo began to close the bathroom curtains before showering, something that had never been necessary in 15 years living in that house, because we discovered that the angle of the main bathroom perfectly aligned with one of the second floor windows of Helena's house, and the idea of being observed in intimate moments had become a constant source of psychological discomfort that was affecting our ability to relax even within our own home. Meals in the garden, which had always been one of our simple pleasures during sunny weekends, became impossible because Helena invariably appeared in her yard at the exact moment we brought food to the outdoor table, initiating loud conversations about topics calculated to interrupt our privacy. Comments about the smell of food, observations about our food choices, and especially veiled criticisms about meal times that didn't correspond to her rigid standards of when a respectable family should eat. "Dinner at 8 o'clock is too late, Laura. It harms digestion and can cause sleep problems," she would shout over the wall, as if we were maintaining a natural conversation between neighbors instead of being subjected to a systematic invasion of our domestic privacy. Her voice carried that penetrating quality she had perfected over decades, projected to reach any corner of our yard and ensure there was no possible escape from her unsolicited opinions on how we should live our lives. The psychological impact of constant surveillance began to manifest in subtle but progressively disturbing ways in our daily routine and mental health. Ricardo, who had always been a naturally relaxed and spontaneous person at home, began developing nervous tics he had never shown before, constantly checking windows to ensure curtains were completely closed, whispering in conversations that should be normal for fear Helena might be listening through the shared walls, and most notably, he had completely lost interest in using our pool because the sensation of being watched while swimming had destroyed any pleasure the activity might provide. I myself began experiencing anxiety symptoms I had never faced before, waking up multiple times during the night with the paranoid sensation that someone was watching me, developing the compulsive habit of checking if Helena was at any window before making any movement in the garden, and especially beginning to constantly question whether my actions were normal, enough not to provoke comments or criticism from the self-proclaimed maternal vigilante who had permanently installed herself in our periphery. The last straw that transformed our tense tolerance into open confrontation happened on an apparently ordinary Thursday, when I discovered Helena animatedly conversing with the online grocery delivery person who had arrived with our weekly supermarket shopping. She had intercepted the delivery person at the gate before he could ring our doorbell, and was examining in detail the contents of the transparent bags while making comments about our product choices. "Red wine on a Thursday? Looks like someone is developing concerning habits," she said loud enough for me to hear from the kitchen, her voice carrying that false concern that barely disguised the pleasure she felt in judging and criticizing every aspect of our life. When I furiously went out to confront her, I found her holding our groceries as if she had every right to inspect what we consumed in our own home, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction at having secured another opportunity for invasion disguised as maternal interest. "Mom, these are our groceries. You have absolutely no right to examine them or comment on them," I said with a firmness that surprised even the delivery person, who was clearly not accustomed to witnessing family confrontations during his routine deliveries. Helena feigned surprise and hurt, a performance she had perfected over decades of emotional manipulation. "Darling, I was just being a good neighbor, making sure deliveries arrived safely. In neighborhoods like ours, it's important for neighbors to look after each other," she responded, deliberately ignoring the fact that she had completely violated our privacy by examining our personal purchases. The delivery person, visibly uncomfortable with the situation, quickly handed me the bags and left, leaving me alone to deal with Helena's most recent invasion into our private life. That night, Ricardo and I had a serious and painful conversation about our options for dealing with the unsustainable situation Helena had created. sitting in the living room with all curtains drawn and speaking in low voices, as if we were planning something illegal instead of simply discussing our private life. We explored all available possibilities, from legal measures to the drastic possibility of selling our house and moving to another neighborhood, perhaps even another city. "We can't continue living like this, Laura," Ricardo said, his voice laden with frustration and exhaustion. "We're prisoners in our own home, modifying every aspect of our behavior to avoid your mother's scrutiny. This isn't living. It's a form of psychological imprisonment that's destroying our peace of mind and our marriage." His words were harsh but true, and I knew we needed to take drastic measures before the damage to our relationship became irreparable. The next day, I decided to seek legal counsel with Dr. Beatriz Almeida, a lawyer specialized in family law and harassment cases, whom Elena had recommended after hearing about our situation during a lunch where I had vented about the nightmare our life had become. Dr. Beatriz's office was in a modern commercial building downtown, a professional environment that offered a comforting contrast to the emotional chaos Helena had introduced into our domestic life. Dr. Beatriz was a 51-year-old Black woman with impeccably styled short curly hair and dark brown eyes that simultaneously conveyed compassion and professional determination. She received me in her spacious office decorated with diplomas and certificates attesting to her impressive qualifications, and listened attentively as I recounted months of privacy invasions, emotional manipulation, and Helena's calculated move to the house next door. "Laura, what your mother is doing can legally be classified as stalking or harassment, especially considering the history of invasive behavior and the premeditated nature of purchasing the adjacent house," Dr. Beatriz explained, taking detailed notes on her tablet as she spoke. "The fact that she's using surveillance equipment like cameras and a telescope pointed at your property constitutes invasion of privacy, and we can seek a restraining order that prohibits her from observing, recording, or interfering with your domestic activities." The possibility of legal action against my own mother was simultaneously liberating and devastating. Liberating because it offered a concrete way out of the unsustainable situation, but devastating because it would mean escalating the conflict to a level that would make any future reconciliation practically impossible. There's also the possibility of seeking a court order requiring her to install visual barriers, such as tall fences or dense vegetation, that block the view between the properties, continued Dr. Beatriz, showing me legal precedents of similar cases on her computer. Some judges have been receptive to arguments about the right to domestic privacy, especially when there's clear evidence of obsessive surveillance and disturbing behavior. She explained that we would need to meticulously document each incident of privacy invasion: photographs of cameras pointed at our house, recordings of Helena making unsolicited comments about our activities, testimonies from neighbors who had witnessed her invasive behavior, and mainly a detailed diary of the psychological impact that constant surveillance was having on our lives. I returned home that afternoon with a folder full of legal forms and a clear strategy to legally confront Helena's behavior, but also with the emotional weight of knowing I was about to cross a line that would permanently change the nature of our already troubled relationship. Ricardo was anxiously waiting for me in the kitchen, and when I reported Dr. Beatriz's advice, I saw a mixture of relief and concern cross his face. "I completely agree with seeking legal measures if necessary," he said, holding my hands across the table. "But I also know how emotionally difficult this will be for you. Suing your own mother isn't something done lightly, even when she has clearly crossed all acceptable boundaries." His understanding and support were comforting, but didn't diminish the anguish of having to choose between accepting perpetual surveillance or taking legal action against the woman who had given birth to me. During the following days, I began the meticulous process of documenting each instance of privacy invasion and disturbing behavior from Helena. I installed a recording app on my phone to capture your invasive comments shouted over the wall, took discreet photographs of the security cameras pointed at our garden, and most importantly, began keeping a detailed diary of how the constant surveillance was affecting our mental health and quality of life. Ricardo contributed his own observations, documenting the times he had seen Helena using binoculars to observe our windows, and primarily reporting the impact the situation was having on his ability to work from home. He had set up an office in the guest room years ago, but now felt constantly observed and unable to concentrate, knowing that Helena could be monitoring his movements through the windows. One particularly disturbing afternoon, while working in my orchid garden, an activity that had always been my form of meditation and escape from daily stress, I heard the unmistakable sound of a camera repeatedly firing. When I looked up, I saw Helena shamelessly standing on her second-floor balcony, pointing a professional camera with a telephoto lens directly at me, photographing every movement I made as if documenting a celebrity's life for a gossip magazine. "I'm creating a family album!" she shouted when she noticed I had spotted her. As if secretly photographing your adult daughter on her own property was perfectly normal and acceptable behavior. The violation was so flagrant, so devoid of any awareness of appropriate boundaries, that it made me question whether Helena had completely lost touch with reality or was deliberately escalating her behavior to force me into some kind of confrontation. "Mom, you need to stop this immediately," I shouted back, my voice trembling with accumulated anger and frustration. "What you're doing is illegal and disturbing. You're stalking me." But Helena just smiled in that condescending way she always used when I tried to establish boundaries, as if I were a child having a tantrum instead of an adult woman defending her basic right to privacy. "Don't be dramatic, Laura. Mothers take pictures of their children all the time. It's what we do. It's how we show love," she responded, continuing to photograph despite my protests. The perversion of normal maternal logic, transforming an act that could be affectionate in an appropriate context into a tool of invasion and control, was typical of how Helena distorted healthy family concepts to justify her pathological behavior. That night, I showed the accumulated evidence to Ricardo, including a video I had managed to record of Helena photographing me in the garden. His face contorted into an expression of disgust and disbelief as he watched the recording, clearly struggling to process the level of invasion we were facing. "This is sick, Laura. Completely sick. Your mother needs serious psychological help, but more importantly, we need legal protection against this behavior," he said, his voice carrying a determination I had rarely seen in him. "Tomorrow morning, we'll go together to Dr. Beatrice's office and start the legal process. Enough. This has crossed all imaginable boundaries." His firmness gave me the courage I needed to make the final decision to seek a restraining order against Helena. But before we could execute our plan, Helena escalated her invasive behavior to a level that not even I, knowing her propensity to ignore boundaries, could have anticipated. The following Saturday, Ricardo and I had gone out shopping and for lunch, an attempt to regain some normality in our lives, and temporarily escape the psychological prison our home had become. When we returned late in the afternoon, we found our back door open and obvious signs that someone had been inside our house. My heart raced as we ran through the rooms, checking if anything had been stolen, but it quickly became clear that nothing of value had been taken. Instead, we found disturbing evidence that someone had been through our personal belongings. Drawers of intimate clothing had been opened and reorganized. Personal documents in the office had clearly been examined and replaced in a different order. And most disturbing of all, I found a note from Helena on our bedside table. The note, written in her unmistakable handwriting on scented paper she always used for correspondence she considered important, read, "Dear Laura, I noticed you had gone out and was concerned about the security of the house. As a good mother and neighbor, I decided to check if everything was in order. I took the opportunity to organize a few things that seemed out of place. I also noticed you're almost out of milk and eggs. I took the liberty of making a shopping list for you. Kisses, Mom." The casualness with which she admitted having invaded our house, rummaged through our belongings, and completely violated our most intimate privacy was both shocking and typical of her complete lack of awareness about appropriate behavior. Ricardo went livid when he read the note, his face turning red with anger as he crumpled the paper in his hands. "This is breaking and entering. It's a crime. She confessed in writing that she entered our home without permission," he shouted, his voice echoing through the violated house. "We're calling the police right now. This has gone beyond all possible limits. Your mother is a criminal, Laura, and needs to be treated as such." I knew he was right, that Helena had crossed a clear legal line that couldn't be ignored or excused as maternal eccentricity. But I still hesitated, struggling with decades of conditioning that made me feel guilty for considering police action against my own mother. "Wait," I said, my mind racing to process the implications of what had happened. "She has a key. How else could she have gotten in?" The realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. Helena must have made a copy of our key at some point, probably during one of her previous visits when we still maintained the pretense of a normal relationship. The breach of trust was even deeper than the physical invasion of our home. She had planned this, prepared the ground to be able to enter our house whenever she wanted, transforming our home into an extension of her surveillance domain. I immediately called an emergency locksmith and had all the locks in the house changed that same afternoon, a measure that should have been taken the moment Helena moved into the house next door. While the locksmith worked, installing high-security locks that would be much more difficult to duplicate, Ricardo called Dr. Beatriz on her emergency number, reporting the home invasion and asking for guidance on how to proceed. She advised us to immediately file a police report, preserve all evidence including Helena's note, and document any items that might have been touched or altered. "This completely changes the nature of the case," she said through the speakerphone. "Breaking and entering is a serious crime. And with her written confession, we have solid grounds not only for a restraining order but possibly for criminal charges." I spent the rest of that Saturday in a state of shock and disbelief, trying to process the fact that my mother had violated the sanctity of our home, the only place where we still thought we had some privacy away from her obsessive surveillance. Each room in the house now seemed contaminated by her unauthorized presence, each object potentially examined and judged by her critical eyes. The feeling of violation was so profound that I felt physically sick, running to the bathroom several times with waves of nausea caused by anxiety and horror at the situation. Ricardo tried to comfort me, but he himself was struggling to deal with the anger and sense of helplessness in the face of the invasion. On Sunday morning, we woke to the sound of Helena humming cheerfully in her garden, apparently without any awareness or concern about the seriousness of what she had done the day before. Her ability to compartmentalize and rationalize her criminal behavior as acts of maternal love was truly disturbing, suggesting a level of disconnect from reality that went beyond simple controlling behavior. Watching her through the kitchen window as she pruned rose bushes with the serenity of someone without a care in the world, I finally understood that Helena wasn't just an overprotective or controlling mother. She was someone with serious psychological problems that made her genuinely dangerous to our safety and well-being. The visit to the police station that afternoon was a surreal and emotionally devastating experience. The government building, with its institutional beige, painted walls, and the characteristic smell of old coffee and disinfectant, seemed an unlikely setting for reporting my own mother for breaking and entering. The officer who attended to us, a middle-aged man with a tired expression that suggested years of dealing with family conflicts, initially seemed skeptical when we began to report the situation. But when we showed Helena's note confessing to the invasion, the photographs of cameras pointed at our house, and the documented history of invasive behavior, his attitude visibly changed. "This is serious," he said, typing our statement into his ancient computer. "Home invasion with written confession, plus evidence of systematic stalking. We'll need you to provide a formal statement, and we'll probably have to summon your mother for questioning." The words, "summon your mother for questioning," echoed in my mind like something out of a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. In all my fantasies about establishing boundaries with Helena, I had never imagined it would reach the point of police involvement, of turning our family dysfunction into a police matter. But there I was, signing official documents that would initiate a criminal investigation against the woman who had raised me, who had fed me, clothed me, and supposedly loved me during the most vulnerable years of my life. The cognitive dissonance was almost unbearable. How to reconcile the memories of a mother caring for me as a child with the reality of an obsessive stalker who had invaded my adult home? Ricardo remained by my side throughout the entire process, his hand firmly holding mine as I struggled to maintain my composure, narrating years of privacy violations that had culminated in the physical invasion of our home. The officer asked specific questions about dates, times, witnesses, methodically building a case that transformed Helena from concerned mother to perpetrator of crimes. "How long has this behavior been occurring?" he asked. And I found myself going back decades in time, remembering incidents in adolescence, college, early in my marriage, constructing a pattern of behavior that revealed that moving to the house next door was just the most recent escalation of an obsession that had lasted my entire life. When we finally left the police station with a copy of the police report and the promise that a detective would be assigned to the case, the sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and red that seemed to reflect the emotional turmoil inside me. "You did the right thing," Ricardo said as we drove home in silence. "I know it doesn't feel that way now, but establishing clear legal boundaries is the only way to protect our sanity and our marriage." His words were logical and comforting, but they didn't lessen the feeling that I had crossed an emotional Rubicon from which there was no return. The relationship with Helena, already dysfunctional and problematic, had now entered the territory of criminal procedures and court orders. On Monday morning, 2 detectives appeared at our door to collect additional evidence and ask more detailed questions about Helena's pattern of behavior. Detective Silva, a 40-year-old man with observant eyes that suggested experience in complicated domestic cases, And Detective Rodriguez, a young but clearly competent woman who took meticulous notes, spent 2 hours documenting every aspect of the surveillance and invasion we had suffered. They photographed Helena's cameras pointed at our property, measured distances and viewing angles, and primarily collected statements from neighbors who had witnessed Helena's increasingly erratic behavior since her move. Donna Carmem, our elderly neighbor, was particularly helpful, providing the detectives with a detailed account of how Helena had interrogated her about our habits before buying the house. She wanted to know everything, Donna Carmem told the detectives, her voice fragile but clear. What time they woke up, when they left for work, who visited them, how often they traveled. I thought it strange at the time, but when she mentioned being Laura's mother, I thought it was just normal maternal concern. Now I see it was something much more sinister. Her testimony corroborated our claim that Helena's move had been premeditated and calculated specifically to facilitate surveillance and control. The inevitable confrontation with Helena happened that afternoon, when she was formally notified about the police report and the criminal investigation. I was in the kitchen, trying to distract myself by preparing dinner, when I heard her strident voice outside, arguing with the officers who had arrived to deliver the notification. "This is absurd. A misunderstanding. My daughter would never do this to me. You must be mistaken," she screamed, her voice filled with indignation and disbelief. But when the officers showed the documents with my signature, her tone changed drastically. The silence that followed was more terrifying than her screams, because I knew Helena well enough to know that silence from her meant she was processing and planning her response. It didn't take long for that response to arrive. Less than an hour after the officers left, Helena was at our door, ringing the doorbell insistently and shouting through the wood. "Laura! Laura, I know you're in there! We need to talk about this terrible misunderstanding. Open the door immediately. I am your mother!" Her voice alternated between authoritarian command and dramatic pleading, an emotional roller coaster calculated to manipulate me into opening the door. Ricardo physically held me back when I moved to answer it, reminding me that any contact now could complicate the legal case. "No, Laura. This is exactly what Dr. Beatrice warned us not to do. Any interaction now can be used against us, or give her an opportunity to manipulate the situation," he said firmly, guiding me away from the door while Helena continued her verbal assault from outside. "Laura, you're destroying our family. You're treating me like a common criminal when all I did was worry about your well-being." Helena continued shouting from outside, her voice becoming progressively more hysterical as she realized we wouldn't open the door. 42 years I raised you, protected you, loved you more than my own life, and this is my reward? To be reported to the police as if I were a dangerous stranger? The performative drama was typical of her manipulation attempts, but this time there was an element of genuine desperation in her voice, suggesting she was finally understanding that she had crossed a line from which there would be no easy return. After 20 minutes of shouting, pleading, and veiled threats about the consequences of betraying one's own mother, Helena finally gave up, but not before shouting one last statement that chilled my blood. "You'll regret this, Laura. A daughter who betrays her mother is cursed. I'll make you understand that a mother's place is by her daughter's side no matter what man's justice says." The following weeks were a nightmare of progressive escalation of Helena's behavior, who seemed determined to prove that no court order would be able to prevent her obsession with controlling my life. Despite being formally notified not to approach or attempt direct contact with us while the criminal investigation was underway, she found creative and disturbing ways to maintain her oppressive presence in our lives. It started with small, calculated provocations, loud music late at night coming from her house, specifically the lullabies she sang to me as a child, played at a volume sufficient to penetrate through the walls and prevent me from sleeping. When we complained to the police, she claimed to be merely nostalgic and processing the loss of her daughter, transforming herself into a victim in the eyes of the officers who didn't fully understand the psychological nature of her harassment. During the day, Helena began receiving an endless series of visitors at her house. Distant relatives I hadn't seen in years, her old friends from the book club, even my kindergarten teacher, now a 70-year-old lady who could barely walk. They all arrived with the same mission: to try to convince me to forgive Helena and resolve this misunderstanding within the family. They rang our doorbell at random times, always with prepared stories about how Helena was withering from sadness and how I was destroying a poor elderly mother who just wanted to be close to her daughter. It was a coordinated campaign of social pressure, using every person Helena could manipulate as a weapon in her psychological war against our decision to establish legal boundaries. The most disturbing of these encounters happened when Father Antonio, The parish priest from the church Helena religiously attended on Sundays, appeared at our door on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. He was a 55-year-old man, with snow-white hair and blue eyes that normally conveyed serenity and compassion, but now seemed to carry the weight of an uncomfortable mission. "Laura, my child, I come as an intermediary of peace," he began, his voice soft but insistent. "Your mother is in deep spiritual suffering. She spends hours kneeling in church, crying and praying that you find in your heart the Christian forgiveness that our faith teaches." His words were carefully chosen to awaken religious guilt, exploiting values that Helena knew had been important to me during childhood, when I still believed that family and faith were inseparable concepts. "Father Antonio, you only know the version my mother told you," I replied, trying to stay calm despite the anger boiling inside me at seeing yet another manipulation attempt using figures of moral authority. "She invaded our home. She installed cameras pointed at our property. She has been systematically stalking me for decades. This isn't maternal love, it's criminal behavior that's destroying my mental health and my marriage." The priest seemed genuinely surprised by the vehemence of my response, clearly not expecting such a different version of events. Helena had obviously omitted the criminal aspects of her behavior, presenting herself as a misunderstood mother, victimized by an ungrateful daughter influenced by her husband. Ricardo, who had remained silent until that moment, intervened with professional firmness. "Father, with all due respect, you are being used as a tool in a manipulation campaign. Helena is violating a court order by attempting indirect contact through you. If you truly want to help, advise her to seek professional psychological help and respect the established legal boundaries." The priest looked visibly uncomfortable, realizing he had been placed in a compromising position. Before leaving, he mumbled something about praying for family reconciliation and hoping that love prevails over law, but I could see in his eyes that he was beginning to question the narrative Helena had constructed. The situation took an even more sinister turn when we discovered that Helena had hired Marcelo Ferreira, a real estate broker known for aggressive tactics, to start approaching our other neighbors with offers to buy their houses. Donna Carmem alerted us during a concerned conversation about the garden fence. "Laura, dear, that blonde man in the expensive suit has been visiting all the houses on the street, offering above-market values, saying he has a client very interested in acquiring multiple properties in the neighborhood for a special family project." The implication was terrifying. Helena was trying to buy the entire street, create a surveillance complex from which it would be impossible to escape without completely abandoning our established home and life. Marcelo was a 38-year-old man with that artificial salesman type of beauty who used calculated charm as a professional tool. When he finally knocked on our door, his practiced smile momentarily failed upon recognizing who we were. "Mrs. Laura, Mr. Ricardo, what a pleasure to meet you personally. I have a very interesting proposal from my client for the acquisition of your property. She is willing to pay 30% above market value, cash payment, no inspection required," he said, trying to maintain a professional tone while avoiding direct eye contact, clearly uncomfortable with the unethical nature of his mission. "Marcelo, we both know who your client is," Ricardo responded, crossing his arms in a posture that made clear his zero disposition for games. "And you should know that you're participating in a harassment campaign that is the subject of a criminal investigation. I suggest you reconsider your involvement in this situation before you become an accomplice to crimes." The broker completely lost his professional composure, his face turning red as he stuttered something about just doing his job and having no knowledge of legal issues. He left hastily, but the damage was done. Now the entire neighborhood knew that Helena was willing to spend fortunes to maintain her obsessive siege on our life. The constant psychological pressure was taking a devastating toll on our physical and mental health. Ricardo developed an ulcer due to stress, requiring daily medication and drastic changes in his diet. I began having recurring nightmares where Helena appeared everywhere. At work, at the supermarket, even in our bedroom. Always watching, always judging, always present. I would wake up several times a night in panic, compulsively checking if the doors were locked, if the windows were closed, if there were no signs of invasion. Paranoia was becoming my constant companion, transforming every shadow into a potential threat, every noise into a sign of imminent danger. It was during this period of progressive deterioration that Dr. Beatriz finally secured a court hearing to request a formal restraining order. The date was set for a gray Thursday in October, and preparation for the legal confrontation consumed every moment of the preceding weeks. We needed to organize all the evidence, photographs, recordings, witness testimonies, medical records documenting the impact of stress on our health, the detailed diary of each incident of invasion and harassment. The document folder grew until it became 3 heavy volumes. Each page additional proof that Helena's behavior had long surpassed the limits of acceptable and entered the territory of the pathological and criminal. On the night before the hearing, I received a call from an unknown number. When I answered, perhaps expecting a court official with information about the process, I was surprised by the voice of a woman who identified herself as Dr. Chao, Marcia Santos, a psychiatrist who had briefly treated Helena 5 years ago. "Mrs. Laura, I am violating ethical protocols by making this call, but I feel it is my moral duty to warn you," she began, her voice tense with the weight of her decision to break medical confidentiality. "Your mother abandoned treatment after only 3 sessions when I suggested that her behavior toward you presented characteristics of obsessive personality disorder with traits of delusional disorder. She refused to accept any possibility that her behavior was problematic. I am concerned about the escalation you are describing. Please take all necessary precautions for your safety." The revelation that Helena had been diagnosed with specific psychiatric disorders, but had refused treatment, added a new dimension of complexity and danger to the situation. We were not just dealing with an overprotective or controlling mother, but with someone who possibly suffered from serious mental conditions that prevented her from recognizing the destructive nature of her behavior. Dr. Marcia explained that delusional disorder could make Helena genuinely believe that her actions were justified and necessary, creating an alternative reality where she was the heroine saving her daughter from imaginary dangers, not the perpetrator of real crimes. She constantly mentioned that you were in danger, that people were trying to take you away from her, that it was her divine mission to protect you, continued the psychiatrist, each word confirming patterns I painfully recognized. When I suggested these fears might be unfounded, she became extremely agitated, accused me of being part of a conspiracy to separate you two, and never returned. I kept your files all these years because something told me this information would be important one day. Dr. Marcia's courage in sharing this information, risking her professional license to protect me, was an act of compassion that deeply moved me amid the nightmare I was living. On the morning of the hearing, I woke before dawn, unable to sleep due to anxiety about the legal confrontation to come. Ricardo was already awake, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of chamomile tea that was cooling untouched, while he reviewed our documents for the 100th time. "Everything will be fine," he said when he saw me, but there was an uncertainty in his eyes that betrayed his optimistic words. We both knew we were about to cross a family Rubicon. After confronting Helena in court, publicly exposing her crimes and mental disorders, there would be no possibility of returning to any semblance of family normalcy. We arrived at the courthouse an hour before the scheduled time, accompanied by Dr. Beatriz, who radiated professional confidence in her impeccable navy blue suit. The courthouse building, with its imposing architecture and solemn atmosphere, seemed the appropriate setting for the family drama that was about to unfold. While waiting in the hallway, I saw other couples and families awaiting their own hearings, each carrying the weight of personal conflicts that had escalated beyond private resolution. There was something deeply sad about seeing so many people forced to seek legal intervention in matters that should be resolved with love and understanding. Helena arrived exactly at the scheduled time, accompanied by her lawyer, a middle-aged man with a tired appearance who was clearly not enthusiastic about the case. She was dressed calculatingly to appear fragile and harmless, a modest floral dress, gray hair simply styled, minimal makeup that emphasized her age. It was a carefully orchestrated performance of a victimized elderly mother, designed to evoke sympathy from the judge. When our eyes met across the hallway, I saw in them not the recognition of guilt or remorse, but an iron determination mixed with something I could only describe as pure obsession. "Mother killer," she whispered as she passed by me, low enough for only me to hear. The words were venomous, calculated to destabilize me moments before the hearing. Ricardo squeezed my hand, having noticed the subtle verbal attack, and Dr. Beatriz discreetly made note of the incident. Every interaction, even the briefest ones, was being documented as additional evidence of Helena's pattern of abusive behavior. The hearing room was smaller than I had imagined, with dark wood-paneled walls and high windows that let in a gray light that matched the somber mood of the proceeding. The judge, Dr. Roberto Mendez, was a 60-year-old man with white hair and eyes that had witnessed decades of family conflicts. He entered with the solemnity appropriate to his position, and everyone respectfully stood up. As he began reviewing the case documents, I could see his eyebrows progressively rising as he absorbed the extent and severity of the allegations. "This is an exceptionally disturbing case," he began, his deep voice echoing in the silent room. "The evidence presented suggests a systematic pattern of privacy invasion, harassment, and criminal behavior that goes far beyond normal maternal concern." Helena tried to protest, but her lawyer quickly silenced her with a touch on the arm. The judge continued, "I will hear testimonies from both parties, but I must warn that home invasion with written confession is an extremely serious allegation that will be given appropriate weight." When it was my turn to testify, I stood up with trembling legs but a firm voice. I reported decades of obsessive surveillance, the progressive invasions of privacy, culminating in the violation of our home. I described the devastating impact on my mental health, my marriage, my ability to live a normal life. "Your Honor, I love my mother," I said, my voice breaking for the first time. "But love cannot be used as an excuse for criminal behavior. She needs psychiatric help, not physical proximity to me. And I need legal protection to be able to live my life without constant fear." Helena's testimony was a masterclass in emotional manipulation and pathological denial. She cried copiously, claiming that everything was a terrible misunderstanding caused by Ricardo's negative influence over me. She insisted that entering our house had been an act of maternal love to ensure our safety, that the cameras were only to record precious family moments, that moving to the house next door was her right as a mother to be close to her daughter. Each justification revealed more clearly the complete disconnection from reality, the inability to recognize normal boundaries, the delusional conviction that her maternal rights superseded any law or personal boundary. "Mrs. Helena," the judge interrupted her at one point, clearly frustrated with her evasiveness, "are you admitting to having entered your daughter's house without permission?" Helena hesitated, realizing the legal trap, but her compulsive need to justify her actions betrayed her. "I have the right to enter my daughter's house. I raised her. That house only exists because I taught her to work and be responsible. Everything she has is thanks to me." Her emotional outburst, full of entitlement and anger, was exactly what the judge needed to hear to understand the gravity of the situation. The most dramatic moment of the hearing came when Dr. Beatrice presented the audio recording I had made of Helena shouting threats outside our door. Helena's shrill voice filled the courtroom. "You'll regret this, Laura! A daughter who betrays her mother is cursed. I'll make you understand that a mother's place is beside her daughter no matter what man's justice says." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Helena's lawyer seemed to shrink in his chair, realizing there was no possible defense for such explicit recorded threats. The judge took only 15 minutes to deliberate before returning with his decision. Based on the evidence presented, including written confession of home invasion, photographic evidence of systematic surveillance, witness testimonies, and recordings of verbal threats, this court grants a complete and immediate restraining order, he announced, his voice leaving no room for ambiguity. "Mrs. Helena Silva is prohibited from coming within 500 meters of the petitioner's residence or workplace, is prohibited from making any form of direct or indirect contact, and must immediately remove all surveillance equipment pointed at the neighboring property." Helena's reaction was explosive and revealing. She rose abruptly, knocking over the chair, her face contorted in pure rage. "You can't do this. She is my daughter. I have rights. Mother's rights. You'll all pay for this. All of you." 2 court officers had to physically restrain her as she tried to advance toward me, shouting obscenities and curses that echoed through the corridors of the court. It was the final confirmation, if any were still needed, that we were dealing with someone deeply disturbed who represented a real danger to our safety. "Additionally," the judge continued, raising his voice over Helena's screams as she was being removed from the room, "I strongly recommend that Ms. Helena seek immediate psychiatric evaluation. Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest and possible criminal charges for contempt of court." He then turned to Ricardo and me with an expression of genuine compassion. "I know this is difficult when it involves family. You did the right thing seeking legal protection. I suggest you also consider additional security measures at your residence." We left the courtroom in silence, the weight of the judicial decision creating a complex mixture of relief and sadness. We had obtained the legal protection we needed, but at the cost of publicly exposing Helena's mental illness and effectively criminalizing our own mother. Dr. Beatrice tried to reassure us that we had made the only possible choice given the circumstances, but her professional words couldn't alleviate the emotional burden of having to seek legal protection against the woman who had given birth to me. The months following the restraining order were marked by a strange mixture of relative peace and constant tension, like permanently living in the calm before the storm, knowing that Helena was there, just a few meters away, legally prevented from approaching but psychologically present in every moment of our day. The house next door remained occupied by her, a constant physical reminder that our battle was far from over, even with the legal protection we had secured. The cameras had been removed as ordered by the court, but I still felt the weight of her gaze whenever I passed by the windows, a ghostly presence that had permanently installed itself in my psyche after decades of obsessive surveillance. Ricardo and I tried to rebuild some normalcy in our lives, but it was like trying to build on quicksand. Each small progress was undermined by the awareness that Helena was there, waiting, planning, looking for loopholes in the court order that she could exploit. We installed a sophisticated security system in our home, with cameras that ironically transformed us into surveillance of our own life, inverting the roles of observer and observed in a disturbing psychological dance. The recording showed Helena occasionally standing in her yard, staring fixedly at our house for hours, technically respecting the legal distance but violating the spirit of the restraining order through her oppressive and constant presence. 3 months after the hearing, I received a letter through Helena's lawyer, a thick envelope that my heart knew contained more emotional manipulation disguised as an attempt at reconciliation. The letter was 20 pages long, handwritten in Helena's meticulous calligraphy, an elaborate narrative that rewrote our family history through distorted lenses where she was simultaneously victim and heroine, misunderstood martyr of maternal love. My dear Laura, the letter began, I write these words with my heart broken into 1,000 pieces, each fragment carrying the infinite love I have always had and will always have for you, my only daughter, my reason for living, my purpose on this earth. The words were calculated to awaken guilt, each sentence a psychological needle designed to pierce the defenses I had built with such effort. Helena described in dramatic detail her suffering in the emotional prison of the restraining order, how she spent sleepless nights crying, how she had lost 15 kilos because she couldn't eat, how her hair was falling out due to the stress of being unjustly separated from her daughter. She narrated selected memories from my childhood, moments carefully chosen to maximize nostalgia and minimize the disturbing aspects of her controlling behavior. Remember when you were 5 and had that high fever, and I stayed awake for 3 nights by your side, placing cold compresses on your forehead and singing your favorite songs? She wrote, conveniently omitting that she had caused the fever by forcing me to take cold baths in winter as a method of strengthening the immune system. The letter also contained subtle threats disguised as maternal concerns. I'm getting old, Laura. My heart is weak. Doctors say stress could kill me at any moment. If something happens to me, you'll have to live with the guilt of having denied a mother her last moments with her daughter. It was emotional blackmail in its purest form, using mortality as a weapon to try to force me to break the restraining order. She also mentioned that she had changed her will, insinuating that I had been disinherited, but leaving the door open for reconsiderations if I returned to being the loving daughter she had raised. I showed the letter to my therapist, Dr. Andrea Campos, who had begun seeing me regularly since the escalation of the conflict with Helena. Dr. Andrea was a 50-year-old woman specialized in family trauma and toxic relationships, with a direct but compassionate approach that helped me process the complex layers of guilt, anger, and sadness that Helena's behavior provoked. Laura, this letter is a classic example of narcissistic manipulation, she explained during our session, highlighting specific excerpts. See how she never takes real responsibility for her actions, always positioning everything as misunderstood acts of love. She cannot recognize you as a separate person with your own rights. But what if she really dies? I asked, voicing the fear that tormented me during sleepless nights. What if the stress really causes a heart attack and I have to live knowing I could have prevented it? Dr. Andrea looked at me with firm compassion. Laura, you are not responsible for Helena's choices, including how she chooses to emotionally process the consequences of her own criminal acts. If she is suffering, it's because she refuses to seek adequate psychiatric help and accept responsibility. You established healthy and necessary boundaries. How she reacts to these boundaries is her choice and responsibility, not yours. The situation took an unexpected turn when Marcelo, the real estate agent, appeared at our door one Saturday morning with a disturbed expression. Mrs. Laura, I need to talk to you about your mother, he said, clearly uncomfortable. She has been calling me obsessively several times a day, wanting me to continue trying to buy houses in the neighborhood. When I refused, she began threatening me, said she would tell my wife about invented affairs, that she would ruin my professional reputation. I'm also considering seeking a restraining order. The revelation that Helena was expanding her obsessive behavior to include harassment of third parties demonstrated that her condition was deteriorating without proper treatment. 2 weeks later, Donna Carmem approached us, visibly shaken. Helena had begun interrogating her daily about our movements, offering money in exchange for information, trying to transform her into a spy. She offered me 5,000 reyes to install a hidden camera pointed at your backyard, Donna Carmem revealed, her elderly hands trembling. When I refused, she insinuated she could discover secrets about my late husband that would tarnish his memory. Laura, your mother needs urgent medical help. This is not normal behavior, even considering the situation between you. It was then that we made the difficult decision to seek involuntary psychiatric commitment for Helena. Dr. Beatrice guided us through the legal process, explaining that with testimonies from multiple witnesses about erratic and threatening behavior, plus the medical history that Dr. Marcia had shared, we would have legal grounds to request a compulsory psychiatric evaluation. It's an extreme measure, Dr. Beatrice warned, but it may be the only way to ensure she receives the treatment she clearly needs, and that you have real safety. The process was initiated on a rainy Monday that seemed to reflect the weight of the decision we had made. Accompanied by 2 court-appointed psychiatrists and court officials, we went to Helena's house for the compulsory evaluation. I remained in the car, unable to personally face the moment, while Ricardo accompanied the professionals. Through the rain-fogged window, I saw Helena at the door, initially confused, then furious when she understood what was happening. Even at a distance, I could hear her screams. My daughter is trying to lock me in an asylum. This is a conspiracy. I'm not crazy. I'm just a mother who loves too much. The evaluation lasted 3 hours, during which Helena apparently oscillated between calculated cooperation and outbursts of anger. The psychiatrists later informed us that she presented clear signs of severe obsessive-compulsive personality disorder with delusional features, confirming Dr. Marcia's preliminary diagnosis from years ago. Mrs. Helena genuinely believes her actions are justified and necessary to protect you, one of the psychiatrists explained to me. She has created an elaborate narrative where you are in constant danger and only she can save you. It's a fixed delusion that requires intensive treatment. Helena was committed for 30 days of involuntary treatment at a specialized psychiatric clinic, a place that looked more like a luxury hotel than a hospital, with well-maintained gardens and comfortable rooms that tried to minimize the trauma of forced hospitalization. The farewell, if it could be called that, happened in the clinic's entrance hall. Helena saw me through the glass doors, and for a moment our eyes met. What I saw in them haunted me. There was no recognition that she needed help, only absolute betrayal, as if I had committed the supreme crime by forcing her to confront her own mental illness. During the first 2 weeks of hospitalization, Helena refused to cooperate with treatment, maintaining the narrative that she was a victim of family conspiracy. But gradually, with proper medication and intensive therapy, small cracks began to appear in her delusional armor. The psychiatrist in charge, Dr. Fernanda Rodriguez, kept us informed about the progress. She's beginning to question some of her most rigid convictions, Dr. Fernanda reported during a call. Yesterday, she admitted for the first time that perhaps some of her actions may have been excessive. It's small progress, but significant. In the 3rd week, I received an unexpected call from the clinic. Helena had requested to see me, not through lawyers or manipulation, but as part of her supervised therapeutic process. Dr. Fernanda explained that it would be a controlled meeting, with her present, and that I had complete freedom to refuse. After days of deliberation and several extra sessions with Dr. Andrea, I decided to accept. Not for Helena, but for myself, for the possibility of some kind of closure, however imperfect. The meeting took place in a bright, airy room at the clinic, with Dr. Fernanda sitting discreetly in the corner, observing. Helena was unrecognizable, not physically, although the medication and controlled environment had visibly improved her appearance, but in her demeanor. For the first time in my life, she seemed vulnerable. Not the performative vulnerability she used as manipulation, but genuine human fragility. Laura, she began, her voice devoid of its usual authoritative tone. The doctor has been helping me understand that perhaps I have misinterpreted some situations. It was the closest thing to an apology Helena had ever articulated, and even then the words came out truncated, fighting against decades of rigid mental patterns. Mom, I replied, using the term for the first time in months. You invaded my house. You stalked me. You turned my life into a nightmare of constant surveillance. Helena flinched at each word as if they were physical blows. I know. No, I don't know. I thought I knew, but everything is confused now. The medication makes everything seem different. Less urgent, less dangerous. Dr. Fernanda gently intervened. Helena is beginning to understand that her perception of constant danger regarding you was a distortion caused by her condition. It's a long process, but she's making progress. Helena looked at me with eyes that for the first time seemed to really see me, not as an extension of herself or property to be protected, but as a separate person. I loved you the only way I knew how, she said, genuine tears running down her face. But now I'm understanding that my way of loving was sick. I left that meeting emotionally exhausted, but strangely lighter. There was no forgiveness. Some boundaries once crossed cannot be undone with apologies or treatment. But there was, for the first time, a mutual recognition of the reality of the situation. Helena was ill, genuinely ill, and that illness had destroyed any possibility of a normal relationship between us. But she was finally receiving treatment. And I was, finally, free from the weight of wondering if I was being cruel by establishing boundaries with someone mentally ill. The 30 days of hospitalization extended to 90 through medical recommendation and Helena's surprising agreement, who seemed to be, for the first time in her life, genuinely committed to her treatment. During this period, Ricardo and I began the process of real reconstruction of our lives. We started using the garden again, opening the curtains, living without the constant weight of surveillance. The house next door remained empty, a physical scar on the landscape that gradually lost its power to disturb us. At the end of the 3rd month, Helena was discharged on the condition of continuing intensive outpatient treatment and supervised medication. She did not return to the house next door. Instead, she moved to an assisted apartment on the other side of the city, a place where she could have independence, but also professional support when needed. The house next door was put up for sale, and symbolically, on the day the sold sign appeared, Ricardo and I opened a bottle of champagne that we had saved for our retirement. 6 months later, I received a letter from Helena. Not 20 pages of manipulation, but a simple card with a short message. Laura, I respect your boundaries. I'm in treatment. I wish you happiness. Helena. No drama, no guilt, no manipulation. Just acknowledgement and respectful distance. I kept the card not as an affectionate memento, but as a milestone of a painful journey that had finally reached some kind of resolution. 1 year after the original restraining order, I attended a lecture on toxic family relationships, sharing my story with other survivors of family abuse. The hardest part, I told the audience, was accepting that love and abuse can coexist, that someone can genuinely believe they are acting out of love while causing profound harm. My mother loved me, in her sick and distorted way, but that sick love almost destroyed my life. Setting boundaries, seeking legal protection, forcing medical treatment, these weren't actions against her love, but acts of self-love, of survival. A woman in the audience raised her hand. Do you regret reporting your own mother? I took a deep breath before answering. I regret taking so long. I regret tolerating decades of invasion before acting. I regret letting it get to the point where she bought the house next door before seeking legal help. But I don't regret choosing my mental health, my marriage, my life over a distorted version of family loyalty that kept me prisoner. Today, 3 years after that fateful morning when I saw the moving truck, I live a life that would be unrecognizable to the Laura who let Helena control every aspect of her existence. Ricardo and I renewed our wedding vows, celebrating not just our love, but our survival as a couple through an ordeal that could have destroyed any relationship. We have a security system at home, not out of paranoia, but prudence. I maintain zero contact with Helena, receiving only occasional medical updates through Dr. Fernanda, confirming that she continues treatment. The house next door was purchased by a young couple with 2 small children, whose laughter and play in the garden created a new soundtrack for our lives, erasing the echoes of Helena's obsessive surveillance. Sometimes when I hear the children calling for their mother, I feel a twinge of something that isn't exactly nostalgia, but recognition of loss. Not of the mother I had, but of the mother I could have had if Helena weren't hostage to her own sick mind. Father Antonio approached me recently, not to attempt reconciliation, but to apologize. I understand now that I was used as a tool for manipulation, he said. Helena still attends church, but she's different, calmer. The medication and therapy have made a real difference. She no longer talks about you, which, paradoxically, seems to be the greatest sign of progress. I thanked him for his visit, but made it clear that I had no interest in updates about Helena. Some chapters need to remain closed for healing to be possible. Dr. Andrea, my therapist, told me in our last session, "Laura, you survived something that many cannot. The process of separating from a mother with severe personality disorder. You established boundaries, protected your life, and still ensured she received necessary treatment. This isn't cruelty, it's compassion informed by self-preservation." Her words became a mantra that I repeat when, occasionally, guilt tries to infiltrate moments of vulnerability. The deepest lesson I've learned is that family isn't an unconditional obligation to tolerate abuse, even when that abuse comes disguised as excessive love. That setting boundaries with toxic parents isn't betrayal, but vital necessity. That sometimes the greatest act of love we can offer to someone mentally ill is forcing them to confront their illness, even if it means being seen as villains in their distorted narrative. Recently, I dreamed about Helena for the first time in months. In the dream, she was standing in the garden of the house next door, but instead of cameras and telescopes, she held a mirror, looking at her own reflection with an expression of discovery. I woke up without the usual panic that accompanied nightmares about her. Dr. Andrea interpreted the dream as my psyche processing the change. Helena finally turned toward herself instead of being obsessed with me. Ricardo and I are considering moving to another city, not running away, but choosing a completely new beginning, without the shadows of the past hovering over every corner. We sold the house for an excellent price to the same couple who bought Helena's house, who planned to tear down the wall between the properties and create a large garden for their children. The poetic irony of physically uniting spaces that were psychological battlefields does not escape me, but brings me strange satisfaction. Where there was obsessive division, there will be healthy union. Where there was surveillance, there will be play. Where there was illness, there will be life. If Helena is reading this someday, and knowing her obsessive nature, even medicated, she will probably find it. I want her to know, I survived you. Not with hatred, not with thirst for revenge, but with understanding that your sick love almost destroyed me, and my self-love saved me. You were the mother you managed to be with the limitations of your tormented mind, and I was the daughter I needed to become to survive that distorted love. There are no villains in this story. Just broken people trying to navigate impossible relationships with the limited tools they possessed. Life goes on. Ricardo and I planted an orchid garden where there was only grass before, each flower a small victory over the fear of being watched while doing something I loved. We swim in the pool without checking windows. We dine in the garden under the stars. Our conversations no longer whispered, but full and free. The house that was a prison became a home again. And somewhere across town, I hope, Helena is learning to exist without monitoring me, discovering who she is beyond the maternal obsession that consumed decades of our lives. This is my story. A story about boundaries, about survival, about the fundamental right to exist free from surveillance, even when the watcher is who should protect us. A story about how love can become a prison, and how sometimes the only way to honor what a relationship once was is to accept what it can never be. A story, fundamentally, about choosing to live even when living means deeply disappointing someone you love, because the alternative is to cease existing as a separate and complete person. My mother bought the house next door to monitor me 24 hours. I bought my freedom at the price of our relationship. And even knowing the cost, I would pay again. Because some prisons, even built with love, are still prisons. And every human being deserves the dignity of privacy, the freedom to exist without surveillance, the fundamental right to be a complete and separate individual, even, especially, from those who gave us life. Did you like Laura's story? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment where you're watching from. Oh, and there's another story waiting for you here on the screen. Click there and I'll be waiting for you.